The night Vivienne Beaumont saved a little girl's life, she had no idea the girl's father owned half of Vancouver. She also had no idea he was sitting 20 feet away watching every second of it. There are men in this world whose names you don't say out loud in certain rooms. Not because it's rude, because the room changes when you do. The air shifts. People set down their glasses. Conversations die the way a fire dies when you pull out all the oxygen, completely, and all at once. Etienne Moreau was that kind of man. If you grew up in Vancouver, you didn't need to be told who he was. You just knew. The way you knew which neighborhoods to avoid after dark, which restaurants never seemed to have a health inspection issue, which city councilors always found their votes going a particular way, without anyone being able to explain exactly why. Etienne Moreau, 41 years old, widower, father of one, and the reason that half the port of Vancouver moved the way it did, quietly, efficiently, and without anyone asking too many questions. He didn't look like what people imagined when they said his name. He wasn't theatrical about it. No flashy watch, no entourage crowding doorways. He wore a charcoal suit that had been made for him specifically, sat with his shoulders relaxed, and had a way of listening to people that made them feel like they were the only person in the room, right up until the moment they realized that wasn't a compliment, that he'd been cataloging every word. He was at Le Carré that Thursday evening for dinner with two business associates, both of whom were being very careful about what they said. The restaurants was the kind of place where the lighting was low enough to feel private and the menu didn't have prices on it. A detail Vivienne Beaumont hated every single time she worked a shift there. Vivienne was 23. She had been waitressing at Le Carré for 14 months. She had a studio apartment in East Van that she shared with a cat named Biscuit and a landlord who kept promising to fix the radiator. She had a business administration diploma from Langara that she was quietly starting to believe would never turn into anything, and she had a boyfriend named Trevor who had, that very morning, told her that her job was a bit embarrassing, honestly, when she mentioned it to his co-workers at his firm's Casual Friday. She was still thinking about that when she came through the kitchen door with a tray of entrees at 7:42 in the evening. She was still thinking about it when she heard the sound. It wasn't a loud sound. That's what people get wrong about emergencies. They imagine a dramatic noise, a crash, a scream. This was quieter than that. A sharp, small cough, then a chair scraping, then nothing. Vivienne turned. At a table by the window, a girl of maybe 7 or 8 was sitting very still with her hands at her throat. Her eyes were wide and already beginning to fill with the specific panic of a child who has realized something is very wrong and cannot understand why no one else has noticed yet. No one had noticed. The couple at the next table were in the middle of an argument. The host was dealing with a new arrival. The two servers on the other side of the restaurant had their backs turned. Vivienne set the tray down on the nearest empty surface. Not gently, she'd think about the dishes later, and crossed the floor in about 4 seconds. She crouched down to the child's level. The girl's lips were starting to go the wrong color. "Can you breathe at all?" Vivienne asked. The girl shook her head. Small, terrified movement. Vivienne didn't think. There wasn't time to think. She'd done a first aid course 18 months ago as part of a summer camp job she'd taken before the restaurant, and the muscle memory came back like a door opening. She helped the girl stand, positioned herself behind her, and began abdominal thrusts. Once. Twice. On the third, a piece of bread, brioche, she'd later learn, the restaurant's famous complimentary basket, came free. The girl dragged in a breath that sounded like the world starting over. Vivienne held her steady as she coughed, rubbed her back the way you'd do for a child you knew, and said very quietly, "You're okay. You're okay. Just breathe. There you go." She was so focused on the girl that she didn't notice the man who had risen from the table in the far corner. She didn't notice him until he was standing directly beside her, and even then, it took her a moment to register him, because his face was completely controlled in a way that didn't match the speed with which he'd crossed the room. "Genevieve." His voice was low. He said it like it was the only word in any language that mattered. The girl turned and grabbed him around the middle. Vivienne straightened up. The restaurant, she noticed now, had gone entirely silent. Not the natural lull in conversation, the other kind, The kind where everyone has clocked something they don't fully understand and are holding very still as a result. The man, Etienne Moreau, though Vivienne didn't know that yet, held his daughter for a moment, his hand pressed against the back of her head. His eyes closed briefly, and then opened. He looked at Vivienne. It wasn't a dramatic look. It wasn't grateful tears or gratitude performed for the room. It was something quieter than that. He looked at her the way you look at a thing that has fundamentally recalibrated something inside you, and you're not sure yet what to do about it. "She's all right," Vivienne said, because it seemed important to say. "She'll want water." Small sips. He nodded once. "Thank you." 2 words. Vivienne had heard that phrase 10,000 times in her career, in every tone. Dismissive, distracted, obligatory. This was none of those. It landed differently. She didn't know why. She went back to her tables. She had almost managed to persuade herself that the rest of the night would be normal. Then Trevor arrived. She hadn't known he was coming. He hadn't texted. He showed up at 8:15 with 2 people she recognized from his office. His colleague Patrick, who had never once acknowledged her existence at Trevor's company events, and a woman named Brielle, who worked in corporate law and had a way of looking at Vivienne like she was a mildly interesting piece of furniture. Trevor slid into the table she'd just cleared near the front, ordered a bottle of wine without asking what was available, and when Vivienne appeared at his elbow with menus, he said, "Oh, you're on tonight? I thought you might have swapped." "I'm here until 10, she said. He glanced sideways at Patrick. "We were just talking about that, actually, the late hours." Vivienne handed out the menus. "Can I get you something to start?" "Vivienne does this 4 nights a week," Trevor said to Brielle, in a tone she had heard him use before, the explaining tone. The one that made her sound like a problem he was working through. "You said you were doing this temporarily," Brielle said, not unkindly, but with the kind of certainty that assumed she already knew the answer. "I'm saving for." Vivienne started. "She's 23 and still waitressing," Trevor said, with a small smile that he thought was affectionate but landed somewhere else entirely. "Her college friends have all moved into their careers, but, you know, the restaurant industry has its appeal." He said appeal like it was in quotation marks. Brielle made a polite sound. Patrick said nothing, which was worse. Vivienne kept her face neutral the way you learn to do after 14 months in service. She asked about starters again. Trevor ordered for the table without asking her what she'd recommend. Then, because the evening hadn't been interesting enough yet, he said, "She was actually thinking about applying to our firm's admin support team. I talked her out of it." He looked at Vivienne directly now, the smile still in place. "You'd hate the politics, honestly. It's probably better you stay here for now. You know what you're doing here." It was said with such complete confidence in its own generosity that Vivienne couldn't immediately form a response. She was aware, in the particular way of someone who has been publicly diminished enough times to recognize the exact texture of it, that every person at that table had just been told, efficiently and with plausible deniability, that she was beneath them. That Trevor had decided this, that he was comfortable saying it within 6 feet of her. She took their order. She walked back toward the kitchen, and she didn't make it all the way there because she stopped in the corridor by the waitstaff station, where no one could see her from the dining room, and stood very still for about 5 seconds, with her hand pressed flat against the wall, because her chest was doing something she needed to get under control before she went back out there. She didn't cry. She wasn't going to cry at work over Trevor. What she felt was worse than crying. It was the particular exhaustion of recognizing, with sudden clarity, that she had been explaining herself to someone who had already made up his mind. She took a breath. She went back out. What happened next, she didn't see coming. She was collecting glasses from a table near the back when she heard Trevor's voice rise. Not dramatically, but enough. The carry of someone who has decided they're not concerned about being overheard. "She's sensitive about it," he was saying to Patrick. "You just have to be patient. Some people take longer to figure out what they're actually suited for." I try to be supportive, but, and here he paused, and Vivienne, standing 3 tables away with her back to him, understood that the pause was a performance. The pause was for Brielle and Patrick to fill in what he didn't say. The pause did more damage than any specific word could. She turned around. She wasn't going to say anything. She had decided that. She was going to go back to the kitchen, and she was going to get through the rest of her shift, and she was going to deal with Trevor later, somewhere private, where she didn't have a tray in her hand and 45 minutes left on the clock. But Trevor saw her turn, and he misread the look on her face. Or maybe he read it exactly right, and it made him feel something, because he said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "Oh, come on. I'm just being honest. You've said yourself you don't know what you're doing long term." The restaurant was not as loud as it had been earlier. Several people at nearby tables were now very interested in their food. Vivian said carefully, "Trevor, this isn't the time. You're the one who turned around," he said. And then, with the kind of confidence that came from having never once been held accountable in public, "You're at work. Can we talk about this later, professionally?" Professionally. He said it to her, in her workplace, in front of her tables. "I'm asking you," Vivian said, and her voice was very steady, which surprised her. "To lower your voice. You're being dramatic." He picked up his wine. "Honestly, this is why. That will be enough." The voice came from behind Vivian. Not loudly, not aggressively. In the way that a door closing is not loud, but you always hear it. She turned. Etienne Moreau was standing at the edge of the conversation. He had not moved toward Trevor. He had simply arrived there, at the precise angle and distance that communicated, without any performance, that he was now involved. He was looking at Trevor with the particular attentiveness he seemed to give everything, complete, unblinking. "This is a private conversation," Trevor said. Etienne glanced once around the room. 12 tables, probably 40 people, every single one of them quiet. "It stopped being private," he said, "Rowley 3 minutes ago." Trevor straightened. He was the kind of man who needed the other man to be less put together than him, and Etienne Moreau was inconveniently well put together. "I don't know who you, this woman," Etienne said, "20 minutes ago, saved my daughter's life." Trevor blinked. "I don't know what you believe her to be," Etienne continued, and his voice never rose, never became theatrical, never indicated that this was a confrontation at all. It was simply a correction, delivered the way corrections are delivered by people who have never needed to shout. "But I know what I saw, and I'd suggest that whatever it is you're trying to establish here, in front of a room full of people, is not particularly reflective on her." Silence. Trevor said, I know what you were doing." Etienne reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set something on the table. A card. Plain. Dark. 3 things printed on it. "The manager here has worked with my family for a long time. If you'd like to finish your dinner, you're welcome to, or you can leave." Either way, what just happened doesn't edge of the tray Vivian was still holding. Somehow, inexplicably, she had not dropped it, and looked at her. "I apologize," he said, "for the disruption to your shift." And he walked back to his table. The restaurant exhaled. Trevor sat in a silence that was different from the one before, the particular silence of a man who has just understood, in public, how small he actually is. Brielle had found something important on her phone. Patrick was studying the menu with the focus of a man reading sacred scripture. Vivian stood there for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went to the kitchen, set down her tray, and stood at the sink and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. She expected that to be the end of it. She was wrong. At 5 minutes to 10, when her shift was finishing and she was pulling her coat from the staff room, one of the other servers, Maya, who had worked at Le Carré for 4 years and knew everything about everything, appeared in the doorway. "Table 14 wants to speak with you," Maya said, with an expression that suggested many things. Vivian looked at her. "Before you ask," Maya said, "yes, I know who that is, and no, I cannot explain his face right now." Table 14 was Etienne Moreau's table. His associates had left an hour ago. His daughter, Genevieve, was asleep against his shoulder, her small hand curled around the lapel of his jacket. A child's unguarded trust in a complicated man. Vivian approached. He looked up. "I won't keep you. I wanted to thank you again." "Properly. You don't have to," Vivian said. "I just did what anyone would have." "No," he said, and the word was not harsh, but it was firm. "That is not true. Most people freeze. It's human. You didn't freeze, you assessed and you moved and you knew exactly what to do. He paused. I was across the room, I wouldn't have reached her in time. Vivienne looked at Genevieve, sleeping, the round, untroubled face of a child who had no idea how close the evening had come to being something else. She's beautiful, Vivienne said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. Something moved in his expression. Not softness, exactly. The door of something that was almost softness, briefly visible. She is, he said, her mother's eyes. Vivienne didn't push on that. He reached into his jacket again and produced an envelope, which he placed on the table and slid toward her. This is for tonight. It isn't enough, but it's what I can do right now. If there's anything else. I don't need anything, Vivienne said. She didn't touch the envelope. He studied her. You're not going to take it. You don't owe me. I disagree. We're allowed to disagree. Something happened then at the corner of his mouth that might, in another context, in another man, have been called a smile. It didn't stay long. You argued back, he said. Interesting. Did you want me not to? I want very few things that I don't get, he said, but I find the exceptions instructive. Vivienne should have left. She knew that. But there was something about the quality of his attention, the completeness of it, that made her stay one sentence longer than was smart. What's her name? She asked. Your daughter, Genevieve, he said. She goes by Vivi, but only to people she's decided she likes. He glanced at the sleeping child. She asked for you, actually, before she fell asleep. She wanted me to tell the girl with the red scarf that she says thank you. Vivienne touched the scarf at her neck. She'd forgotten she was wearing it. Tell her she's very welcome, Vivienne said. Tell her yourself, Etienne said. If you're ever inclined to. It was not an order. It was not a proposition. It was the precise middle thing. A door left open by someone who was not accustomed to leaving doors open, for reasons they hadn't yet fully examined. Vivienne picked up the envelope, not because she'd changed her mind about what she needed, but because she understood suddenly that refusing it was more about pride than principle, and that Etienne Moreau had just survived a version of this evening that she couldn't fully comprehend, and the least she could do was let him close the loop. Thank you, she said. No, he said, very quietly. Thank you. She was putting on her coat in the vestibule, the October cold of Vancouver already pressing through the glass doors when she heard the small voice behind her. Miss? She turned. Genevieve was standing in the corridor, barefoot, Etienne's jacket wrapped around her shoulders like a blanket, her father a step behind with the expression of a man who has learned not to interfere when his daughter has decided something. The girl crossed the floor and held out her hand. In it was a small paper crane, folded with the particular careful imprecision of a 7-year-old. It had been made from the corner of a paper napkin. It's for luck, Genevieve said, very seriously. My maman taught me. She said if you fold it right, the person you give it to will be okay. Vivienne crouched down. She took the crane with both hands, the way you take something that matters. I'll keep it safe, she said. Genevieve nodded, satisfied. Then, with the supreme confidence of a child who has made up her mind, you can come for dinner sometime. At our house, Papa makes pasta on Sundays. It's not very good, but he tries. Vivienne looked up. Etienne was watching his daughter with an expression that he hadn't quite finished controlling. Something open and wrecked and quietly ferocious all at once. The face of a man who has spent years being afraid of this exact thing. Loving someone this much with this little certainty about the world. He met Vivienne's eyes. She's not wrong about the pasta, he said. Vivienne laughed. It was a real laugh, not a polite one, the surprised kind, the kind that comes before you've decided whether it's appropriate. It lasted only a moment, but in the particular silence of that vestibule, with the rain starting outside and the city of Vancouver doing what Vancouver does in October, going gray and close and quietly beautiful, it was the loudest thing that had happened all night. She stood. She tucked the paper crane into her coat pocket. Sunday, she said. Etienne Moreau, who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time, was quiet for a moment. Sunday, he confirmed. There is a particular kind of evening that you remember not because anything was resolved, because nothing was, not really, but because something shifted, the way tectonic things shift, slowly, underground, invisible until it isn't. Vivienne Beaumont drove home to East Van that night, with a paper crane in her pocket and an envelope she hadn't opened on the passenger seat. And Biscuit the cat met her at the door the way he always did, and the radiator was still making that noise. And Trevor had sent 3 texts that she read once and then set her phone face down on the counter. She put the crane on the windowsill. She stood there for a while, looking at it. She thought about a little girl who'd handed her something made of a napkin, like it was the most valuable thing she owned. She thought about a man who'd crossed a restaurant to correct something that wasn't his business, and then apologized to her for the inconvenience, and meant both of those things without contradiction. She thought, some people take up exactly the right amount of space, and you only notice it because you've been around so many people who take up the too much. She didn't know what Sunday would be. She didn't know what any of it would be. But for the first time in a long time, she was curious to find out. If you've ever been in a restaurant and had someone speak over you like you weren't there, like your choices and your work and your whole life were just a footnote to someone else's story, you know exactly what Vivienne felt that night. And if you've ever had someone step in, not with noise, not with drama, but with the kind of quiet certainty that changes the air in a room, you know what happened next meant something she won't forget. If this story got you, drop it in the comments. And if you're new here, welcome to Lily's Romance Library. Hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. What do you think? Should Vivienne go on Sunday? And what happens when Etienne's world catches up with a woman who has no idea what she just stepped into? Tell us below. We read every single one.